Okay, let's unpack this. We are diving deep today into a story that takes a very specific and popular genre, the boys love Omegaverse,
Right.
and it treats it almost like a biblical origin story. We're talking about Yuma Ishinozu's four-volume manga, No God in Eden.
And this is, I think, an essential deep dive for anyone who's curious about how genres can innovate. Most Omegaverse stories, they start centuries after the fact.
The world is already set up.
The world is already rigidly divided. You have your alphas, your omegas, it's all established. But this series asks a different question. What was day one like?
Yeah, what happens when two totally ordinary high school students suddenly become the very first alpha and omega on the planet?
And there's no rule book. Nothing.
Right. So our mission today is really to trace their complete four-volume journey. We're following Takai Shikito and Nishio Ririto as they go from just absolute biological chaos.
All the way to finding some kind of emotional harmony. We're going to analyze how the story uses that primal desire, that Adam and Eve allegory, to explore these massive themes of identity, loss of self, and finally, self-acceptance.
And we should mention, for anyone new to it, that the series really balances that spicy, mature content, which is driven by, pure primal lust.
With genuinely heartfelt emotional development, the character drama in the later volumes is just fantastic.
It really is. So let's start at the beginning. Volume 1. Before everything changes, we just meet two regular high school students.
You've got Takai Shikito, who will become the alpha, and he's the quintessential shy, introverted, intellectual.
The bookworm.
The bookworm, exactly. He's serious, keeps to himself, and he secretly admires the popular kids from afar. He's someone who really needs logic and texts to understand his world.
And then you have his complete opposite, Nishio Ririto, the future Omega.
Handsome, charismatic, popular. He's the definition of a high school people pleaser.
They're in completely different social orbits. There's almost no reason for them to ever properly interact.
Which makes the catalyst, the big event, so much more shocking. It's this sudden, biologically unprecedented transformation.
It all kicks off during gym class. Nishio is just overcome by this strange, feverish heat.
And at the exact same moment, Takai, who's across the room, is overwhelmed by this intense, alluring scent coming from him. This is it. This is the moment the Omegaverse is born.
What's so fascinating is how they react. The normal human thing to do would be to call a teacher, maybe an ambulance.
Of course.
But that's not what happens. Primal instinct just completely takes over. They're drawn together by this unbearable need.
And they end up in a storage room.
For a 7-day sexual ordeal. It's driven purely, and I mean purely, by lust.
And this is where that initial volume gets a lot of criticism, right? Some readers call it PWP.
Plot, what plot, yeah.
Meaning it's just heavy on the physical encounters, not so much the emotional development. But I have to ask, isn't that kind of a narrative necessity here?
I think it has to be. It's like a biological trap. It strips away all their societal conditioning first.
So that their later conscious choices mean more.
Exactly. And this is where Takai's intellectual side really becomes the core of the story.
Absolutely. The real tension isn't just physical, it's in his mind. Takai, the logical one, immediately turns to his science books to try and figure out what's happening.
He needs to understand it.
He needs to categorize this monumental loss of control. He quickly realizes they aren't just sick, there's something new. They are the world's first alpha and omega. He uses his intellect to define his new reality.
And that's the key takeaway from Volume 1, isn't it? It's the establishment of this inexplicable but powerful biological bond.
So if Volume 1 was about, let's say, biological slavery, then Volume 2 asks the question, can they ever go back to being normal?
And that struggle for normalcy is everything in the second volume. The conflict just pivots dramatically.
They come out of that storage room and now they have to try and go back to high school life.
While keeping the biggest secret in human history. So the conflict shifts from being internal confusion to just immense external pressure.
And they try to manage it. They start a secret relationship, try to build something on top of that initial incident.
But this is where their new biologically driven personalities just clash so hard with who they used to be. And that's the real drama.
What always struck me was how Takai's alpha instinct just overwrites his gentle nature almost immediately. How does the author make that possessiveness feel like a genuine internal conflict?
By tying to his original shyness, I think. He's not just possessive, he's terrified of this new violent instinct inside him, but he's also compelled to obey it. For him, it's a loss of self through dominance.
Well, Nishio is dealing with the opposite. He was this charismatic, independent people pleaser.
Right.
And now he's hit with this overwhelming vulnerability, this yearning, and this biological need to rely on someone else. For him, the struggle is shedding that facade of self-sufficiency. That's got to be shattering.
I mean, talk about skipping the dating phase. 7 days in a storage room and then suddenly you're in a secret relationship. Going back to class must have been so awkward.
It creates this really intense us against the world dynamic built on a secret they can barely control.
Yeah, and Volume 2 does a great job of foreshadowing that the world is starting to notice. We get the introduction of that silent observer.
The character who starts picking up on the subtle changes, the sense, their behavior, it adds this layer of suspense. You just know their little bubble they eat in isn't going to last.
It's all about nature versus nurture in Volume 2.
Yeah.
Biology forced them together, but now they're consciously choosing to build an emotional bond.
Fighting their new instincts while also trying to just be normal high school kids.
But as we see in Volume 3, their private Eden is about to have its walls come crashing down. Because what happened to them, it's starting to happen everywhere.
That's the critical pivot. Volume 3 is where the stakes just get so much higher, both for them and for the world.
And the setting tells you everything you need to know. Nishio's second heat cycle happens during a high school training camp.
The worst possible place.
The worst possible place. It maximizes the risk of exposure to dozens of their classmates. A private crisis is now on the verge of becoming a public disaster.
And the demands on the characters here are huge. Takai has to step up, not just emotionally, but strategically.
We see him shift. He's not just an emotional handler anymore. He's a protective tactician, using his intelligence to keep their secrets safe.
He's not just possessing Nishio, he's protecting him. It proves his alpha role is more than just dominance. It requires intellect.
And this volume is so crucial for the world building. It finally confirms what they suspected.
Their isolated incident is no longer isolated.
The Omegaverse is starting to flourish globally. Other people are waking up with the same physiological changes.
And that's the moment the story's scope just explodes. It goes from a two-person character study to a broader world narrative. They realize they are literally the Adam and Eve of this new reality.
And if they don't figure out the rules, chaos will.
On top of that, the quiet threat from Volume 2, that silent observer,
becomes a very active external threat. Just as the global phenomenon is starting. It's too much for two teenagers to handle by themselves.
And this is where that theme of society versus the individual really comes to a head. They're forced out of their isolated Eden.
And they have to face the fact that their secret just isn't sustainable anymore, not in a world that is fundamentally changing because of them.
Which leads us directly into the final necessary confrontation in Volume 4.
And here's where it gets really interesting. Because the authority figures they've been dreading,
The parents.
specifically family, Takai's suspicious parents become involved, which is always, a terrifying thought for a high schooler.
But the author gives us a bit of a twist. It's actually Takai's father, who ends up saving them from being completely exposed during that disastrous training camp.
Which forces the confrontation. And this event is really the culmination of Takai's entire maturity arc.
He fully transforms. He goes from being the analytical bookworm who only reads about the world to a confident, decisive leader.
He has to passionately and logically defend his partner and their, unique and unprecedented relationship to his own father.
It's his defining moment. It proves that his intellect and his emotion can actually stabilize the biology.
And on the other side, Nishio, the former people pleaser, he completes his arc too. He finds stability and security.
He moves past that insecurity and vulnerability. He becomes comfortable with his authentic Omega identity, and crucially, he embraces his dependence on Takai.
But it's a chosen dependence, not a forced one. It's a commitment.
They finally find harmony. The thematic conclusion is just that. They successfully balance their primal urges with a conscious, emotional commitment. They accept their place as the world's Adam and Eve.
And that title, No God in Eden, is so beautifully realized at the end. There was no established societal rulebook, no God, to define their condition for them.
So the true Eden wasn't some place of lost innocence.
No. It was the state of harmony they found through mutual acceptance and love, something they built themselves out of necessity and choice.
It just provides this strong sense of resolution, replacing all that uncertainty and secrecy with a stable emotional foundation for their new world.
Now let's talk about the reception, because this series is really, really praised by fans.
It is.
They love the innovative origin story idea and the dynamic between the shy intellectual alpha and the charismatic Omega. It's seen as a truly thoughtful gem in the genre.
That said, it's worth noting the critiques. They're mostly tied to the pacing.
Right, back to Volume 1.
That PWP nature of the first volume was a point of contention for some readers who, prefer a slower emotional build-up. And yeah, there was a rare outlier reviewer who gave it a really low score, seeming to just not get past the primal nature of the beginning.
But the general consensus in the BL community is overwhelmingly positive, especially for the evolution we see in Volumes 2 through 4.
Oh, for sure.
And we absolutely have to talk about the artwork because it is so integral to telling the psychological story.
The visual language Yuma Ikonos uses is, well, it's frequently described as exquisite.
It's beautiful.
The line art is clean, detailed, and it definitely has a strong shoujo influence. That aesthetic, that's often tied to romance and emotional intensity.
It really enhances the character's beauty and their vulnerability. You can see that contrast in the designs themselves, can't you?
Immediately, Nishio is drawn to be more classically beautiful, which really emphasizes his vulnerability and desirability as the Omega.
And Takai, who starts out as this gentle bookworm.
His features get slightly sharper, a little more rugged as the series goes on. It's a visual representation of him growing into that dominant, protective alpha role.
But for me, the most crucial element is the focus on their facial expressions. They're so incredibly expressive.
They're not just happy or sad. They convey this raw, complex psychological state.
Exactly.
When you look at their faces during a heat cycle, you see the emotional confusion, the agonizing desire, the deep yearning. The art does so much heavy lifting. It shows you Takai's internal struggle against his own possessiveness.
And it shows you Nishio's vulnerability as his public mask just completely crumbles. The art really tells the internal story.
It absolutely does.
So, if we look back at the entire journey of No God in Eden, I think the central accomplishment of this deep dive is pretty clear. We've seen how the author used the raw mechanics of the Omegaverse not just as a fantasy backdrop,
But as the engine.
as the engine for this profound psychological transformation, forcing two teenagers to completely rebuild their identities from the ground up, together.
They had to create their own rulebook using their intellect and choice. And this raises, I think, a really important final question for you to consider.
Okay.
If Takai and Nishio established the genre's foundational rules through logic and emotion, what responsibility does that leave for the next generation of alphas and omegas? They're going to inherit these biologically defined rules, but without the freedom of that initial world-altering choice. What happens when your Eden is handed down to you instead of being built from scratch?
Thanks so much for watching. If you enjoyed the video, please consider liking, commenting, and subscribing. It really helps the channel grow. See you in the next one.